Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in us the fire of your love. Amen. Well, my first year of college, I was down at Illinois State in Normal, and my parents were living in Chicago Heights. And my grandma's birthday was coming up, and she was going to be 83. It was my mom's mom, the only grandma I ever knew, because my dad's mom had died when he was a kid. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to go home and surprise her for her birthday? So I started looking into bus fare and train fare, and I was just having a hard time working anything out. And when one of my friends heard I was doing this, and she was a senior, and she had a car, she said, take my car. I'm like, are you serious? She's like, yeah. So I said to one of my friends in the dorm, I was like, you want to go home tomorrow with me for a cooked meal? And she's like, yeah. And so we drove home, and I get there, and my grandma was setting the table. And she looked up over her glasses and saw me standing there, and I had brought some flowers for her, and she's like, good Lord, what are you doing here? I said, happy birthday, I came to have a meal with you and see you. And so it was great, and then no one else was home at that time, and then my mom came in. Now, in the meantime, my friend Bev's sitting in the living room. My mom comes in and sees Bev, hasn't seen me yet, says hi to Bev, has no idea who she is. And then when she sees me, does a double take, but when she saw, it was just hi, but my dad always brought home strays. So to her to have an extra person in the house was not that unusual. Holiday meals, always room for another person. There was one time when I was in college, there were two women that lived in a nursing home, and one of them had some mental illness, and he would bring her to church, and she'd hang out there, and she had she was a little quirky, but she was a nice lady, and she'd sit there and kind of rub her hands a lot and shuffle her feet, but, he always got her. And then there was another lady who had her legs amputated, so she was in a wheelchair. And so he called before Thanksgiving. He said, Mayor, I've got this lady. I want to ask her over to Thanksgiving. Do you think you can help her in the bathroom? Because, see, I was a special ed major for physically disabled. I was like, sure, Dad. And so it was like he was always looking for ways to include people. And I can remember one time driving through town kind of near where my folks are, because we were coming across I-80 with the rugby team. And we were going up to, I think, Michigan for a tournament. And I called just to say hi to my folks, and he's like, well, my dad's like, well, can you stop for dinner? I'm like, Dad, I got the team with me. He's like, well, I'll go to KFC and pick up some more chicken. Come. And so I brought the rugby team home with me for dinner, and it was just like, there was always room for another person or a team or whatever we happened to have with us. It was just a matter of pulling out some extra plates, or if we had so many, like I said, my dad probably got paper plates for that night with the rugby team. But I just grew up in this home where it was common to have extra people. At the holidays, there'd be somebody who didn't have any family in town, and she would be welcomed in. It's just the way my parents lived. And so as I was looking at this gospel today, of course, it struck me how much my parents lived that out. And not that we had big banquets, but that whatever was going on at our house, there was always room to have somebody else. Jesus said, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. I can't even imagine the party that my dad will have when he hits heaven for all the people he helped along the way. There was one time when we were kids, and he did some flying in the civil rights movement. He went down to Selma with King's Marches, and he was in and out of town some during the civil rights movement. And one time he brought home two young girls that were going to sleep at the airport, and he had met them on the flight, and they were going to sleep at the airport and catch a flight in the morning. And dad of three daughters, he was like, that's not going to be. And he brought them home, and he had my mom set up the rollaway cots, and he even had her putting Noxzema on their sunburn for where they were coming. They were sunburned. And he got up early, made them breakfast, and took them back to the airport. There was no one that wasn't welcome in our home. And I could tell story after story, but I think you get the idea. He lived in the way that Jesus is encouraging all of us to live. It's kind of like that saying, it's like, don't close the room, build bigger tables. Invite more people in. And at Pentecost, Catherine made up these cards, there's room at the table for everyone. There's room, you belong at St. Hugh. And I think of all the people that maybe haven't found us yet. Who is it out there in our sphere that maybe doesn't have a church? I have a friend who, she and her family do not have a church. I'm kind of their personal priest. I've lost count. I forget if it's 5 or 6 funerals I have done for this family in the last 10 years. It's like they have just had more sadness and sorrow and cancer, and yet they don't have a church family. I look at people around here, when they have a loss, people support them through it, and help them along. And there's a real purpose to be in the body of Christ. Jesus didn't go through this world by himself. He had his disciples, he had Mary and Martha and Lazarus, friends that he hung out with. He showed us really what we learned back in Genesis when when God told Abram, it's not good for man to be alone, and Adam in the garden. When he told him it's not good for man to be alone. And he created helpmate. It's like we're not built to be alone. And I'm an introvert. I like my alone time. But I don't want my whole life to be alone. It's such a joy to be with others. And Mike and I, we love to entertain. We haven't in a while because, the house is kind of chaos since his back collapsed. We've got a blow-up bed in our living room, and, it's hard to walk through. But that will change. It won't always be like that. And we always had an open door, too. Probably not quite as open as my dad, but, and I always gave my mom credit. She's like, that's your father, I wouldn't do this. And I was like, you do too, because you're the one that puts the extra plate on, you're the one that's cooking, you're the one that never says no when he has somebody else he wants to bring in. And so I thought, this parable reminds us of the importance. I think I heard once that the most expensive seat in the world are the empty seats in a church. Because Jesus died to pay for people to be in those seats. And if they're not there, why? The number one reason people don't go to church? Does anybody remember?
They weren't asked.
That's right. No one invited them. When they've done studies about why people, and in this generation, a lot of people don't go to church. It's not like people are raised in the church anymore. The number one reason people give for not going to church is that no one's invited them. There's such power in invitation. And of course, we're polite. We don't like to inflict our views on others or our faith. But what's it hurt to invite somebody? Next week, we're going to have an outdoor Eucharist, a picnic. If you've been thinking there's somebody I think I might like to know this community, great time. Just invite them and say, oh, come. We're having a picnic next week. We're going to do the Eucharist outside. We'll have games. It'll be fun. It might be the perfect opportunity. Something that's a little unusual. They don't even have to come into the church. They can just be outside, if people are church shy. There's just so many ways and people that are in need of God's grace, but are out there on the fringes. Reminds me of the story that Jesus told. He's like, get to those people that are on the fringes. Find the poor. Find the crippled, the lame, and the blind. The people that, in his day, if you were crippled or lame or blind, you didn't have a place in society. If you couldn't support yourself, I even found that in Madagascar. There were people begging all the time. And Patsy and Todd really didn't do much for people that were begging and told me, no, it's like we're trying to change by evangelization and economic development and education. And so they didn't just give money to people. But if there was ever a person that was handicapped or blind, those are the people Todd would always give something to. And he said there are no resources in Madagascar to help people like this. And at least we have some resources that can help the disabled, but some places don't. And I'm sure in Jesus' day, they didn't. Those people were dependent on the good-heartedness of others. And so Jesus is being like, these are the people we want to welcome into the kingdom. These are the people that can't give you anything back. But you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Because what does Jesus say? He says, if you give another a cup of cold water in my name, it will be remembered in heaven. I think sometimes we get hung up on, I can't do much, or I don't have enough money, or I can't, I'm barely making ends meet. But you can invite somebody to church. That doesn't cost you a cent. You can invite somebody to share just a simple meal. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Just the gift of time. I had a friend who called me this week, and actually it's one of this family that I buried. The last person I buried for this family was this woman's husband, who we've been friends with for years. And it was Friday, and she texted, and she says, hey, you want to go out to lunch? I had just eaten breakfast. It was right, but I said, sure, And I went, and I just had a soda and talked to her. Because it's a gift to spend time with people. Some people just need that contact. And I know other people have told me when they have lost a spouse, mealtime is the hardest. Because they're used to sitting down and sharing it with somebody, and suddenly there isn't somebody there to share it with. We all know people like this. It's not that hard to look around and find people that need an invitation. But sometimes it's like you got to step out of your comfort zone a little bit. They might say no. Well, okay, but at least you asked. Or if they say yes, then will I have to do anything else? We can take it too far and worry about what else then will be required. I say don't worry about that. Just take it a step at a time. Don't be afraid to extend the invitation. I saw something on Facebook last night. It was just one of those memes. And it says, you will never look into the eyes of someone God doesn't love. When we look at the other, and how othered we are in this society, right? We are divided in them and us, right and left, rich and poor, capable and incapable, working and unemployed. We have so many divisions in our country right now. It saddens me. It just saddens me. But I think the church is the answer to that. Because at this table, we're all welcome. Jesus broke bread and gave it to his disciples and said, do this in remembrance of me. And everyone is welcome at this table. The problem is not everybody's been invited. So who is it that that would benefit from such an invitation? I think that's what Jesus was getting at. There's people out there that are just falling through the cracks of this world. And that's on us, because we let them. And no, we can't save the whole world. But it's like that starfish story. Remember the story about the starfish? Kid on the beach, how these starfish got stranded at low tide, and he's flinging them back into the water. And there's hundreds. And some guy looks at him and says, you can't possibly get to all these starfish. You can't make a difference. And he picked up one and flinged it in the sea, and he said, I made a difference for that one. Whoever it is that you extend an invitation to, it will make a difference. And if somebody turns you down, try somebody else. Because you just never know. And I had asked a friend for a long time if he wanted to go to church or not, and he turned me down a lot. And then one day Mike said, hey, call Scott and tell him if he comes to church, we'll buy him breakfast. And I did. And he came. And then he came back. And he came back. And suddenly, for the first time in his life, he had a church community. We just don't know what the power of an invitation will have in another person's life unless we try. Jesus said, invite them. Invite the ones that are less likely to have a place. There was a commentary in the Christian Century on this lectionary, on this Gospel of Luke. And it's not been an easy gospel, because Jesus keeps challenging us to do more and to be better and to be less selfish. And so it goes on, and it says, Jesus goes on to admonish his followers, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back and you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, although they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Jesus' point ultimately is not to deny our welcome to those closest to us, but to extend our welcome to those whom others tend to forget or ignore. Why is this so important? Because to invite the unseen and unregarded is to embody the living antithesis to self-aggrandizement and self-promotion. A great deal comes down to upending the ethos that so often dominates our lives. Instead of plotting what you can get, ask how you can serve and what you can give. I think in this society, man, it's dog eat dog. It's like, how do we secure our place and our stuff and what we need? And really, Jesus wants a better life for us than that. It's not about the message of the world, the one who dies with the most toys wins. That's not the message of God. The message of God is, how well have you loved? The one who loves much, much is going to be expected of them. The one who's been given much, and Jesus has given us so much. So this is part of what Jesus requires. And there was a little blurb in my Bible about this, and it says, in Jesus' parable, it was the self-sufficient and elite who missed out on the delicacies. The people who were too busy with the demands of fields and oxen and family to take time to participate in the extravagant feast. The underprivileged no doubt thoroughly appreciated the event. It's likely that many of them remembered this unexpected pleasure as a high point in their lives. The bottom line is that no one deserved to attend the banquet. Each guest was welcomed only after having accepted an official invitation. Nothing in our busy agendas can possibly be more important than accepting the offer. In fact, Jesus invites us to enjoy our intimate dinner, communion in our own homes and hearts with Him alone. Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. This was, like I said, kind of the family I grew up in. A home that recognized Jesus as Lord and that Jesus had a place always in our lives. But that in that relationship with Jesus, there were certain things that were expected of us. And one of those things was to reach out to those who didn't have it as well as us. And we weren't rich, but we were rich in many ways. We were rich in family and in love and in faith. And there was always room at the table. May God just continue to break open our hearts so that we make room and think of the people who could be at this table with us and have the courage to invite them. Amen.